They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? These spirits are in heaven, and they are Christian, and they are grieved by their memories. Now, we want to remember things we have said previously, that heaven is only the first stage of the afterlife. The New Testament writers describe the first stage of the afterlife as being a disembodied spirit in heaven, and that is not the goal. And they don't talk about it that much. They talk about going to heaven very briefly. It's very spread out, and this is not discussed as being some great triumph. But the second stage of the afterlife, in which we are re-embodied and there's a resurrection, and the new heavens and the new earth are combined together, and it's a very physical sort of thing. Everybody is re-embodied, and there's an earth. That this is the second stage of the afterlife, and this is the one they want to talk about the most, right? 1 Corinthians 15, Romans 8, Revelation 21 and 22. They're very much concerned with the second stage of the afterlife, and they don't talk about the first stage of the afterlife nearly as much. In fact, our passage here in Revelation 6 is the lengthiest description of the first stage of the afterlife in all of the Bible. They just don't talk about this stage that much of being a spirit in heaven is right after you die. And notice that we get there, and these people have not yet been fully comforted. It's still yet to come. This is very interesting because they're in the presence of God. Another passage that we might compare this to is where the Apostle Paul very briefly mentions this first stage of the afterlife in which we are a disembodied soul. He says that right now we are groaning in a tent, the physical body that we have. And he says we have another heavenly dwelling, that is a body waiting for us in heaven that we are going to put on. And then he says, if indeed putting it on, we may not be found naked. It's interesting, he thinks of the disembodied soul not as being the Christian glorified, but he compares it to nudity, right? It's an intermission. We put off this tent, we're going to put on another building, and in the interim, there is this state of nudity, the disembodied soul. He says that's not the goal. So fascinating. The first stage of the afterlife, disembodied soul. Paul compares it to nudity, and in Revelation 6, they're in the presence of God, and they're still crying out for justice. They're not yet satisfied. This says a few things to us about the first stage of the Christian afterlife. When you die and enter the presence of God, there is no memory switch. Some Christians have wondered, so many bad things happen to us in this life. Is it the case that when I enter into the presence of God, that a memory switch is hit and all the bad things that happen to me, I just won't remember? Or the alternative to this is the emotion switch, that I'll remember all the bad things that happened to me, but I won't feel any suffering over it. I won't be grieved when I think about it. The memory switch has been hit. Well, that's not what we gather here. They remember it, and they're still upset about it. Remember, they're in the presence of God. They are Christians, and they're quoting lament psalms from the Old Testament, which authors wrote when they were grieved. So there is pain of a kind, at least at the beginning of the afterlife. This is possible. But we also need to take seriously the other things that are said. There is this process of healing that is on set. It says each was given a white robe and told to rest. We'll meet the martyrs again in the following chapter, where it says they shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, the sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. And that begins with the first stage of the afterlife. So if we put all these passages together, it seems to be the case that a person dies and their spirit enters the presence of God, and they still remember and are still affected by things that happened in life. And then healing begins as a process, not as a switch. I mean, I take seriously the notion that being in the presence of God and being comforted by God is something that will be effective. But we also have to reckon with a passage here in which people in heaven are still waiting to be satisfied.